A man in a $15,000 suit can make you feel like furniture. Audrey Sinclair had learned that lesson the hard way, standing in the corner of a boardroom she wasn't supposed to understand, running numbers she wasn't supposed to question, invisible to everyone who mattered. She had a gift for disappearing in plain sight. Not the romantic kind, not the elegant, intentional kind that spies have in movies. The kind that comes from being a plus-size woman in a room full of people who have decided, before you open your mouth, that you are not a threat, and not an asset, and not, really, a person worth cataloguing at all. She had stopped fighting it years ago. At 31, working as a contract bookkeeper for a mid-sized logistics company in Montreal, Audrey had made peace with her superpower. She was the woman nobody watched, and so she watched everyone else. The company was called Voss Meridian Transport. On paper, it moved pharmaceutical supplies and industrial equipment between Montreal, Toronto, and Vancouver. The offices smelled like printer, ink, and bad coffee. The staff Christmas party was held in a conference room on the 14th floor with a rented karaoke machine that nobody touched. It was, on the surface, aggressively ordinary. Audrey had known for approximately 8 months that it was not. She hadn't gone looking for the truth. It had simply materialized in front of her, the way things do when you're very quiet and very good with numbers. An invoice that didn't match a shipping manifest, a contractor ID that appeared on 2 separate payroll systems under slightly different spellings, routing fees paid to a shell holding company in Cyprus that had no digital footprint beyond a single address that was. She confirmed one Sunday afternoon with nothing better to do, a dental office in Nicosia. She'd filed it away. Not reported it, not confronted it, simply filed it. Because Audrey Sinclair was smart enough to know that the people running Voss Meridian Transport were not the kind of people you confronted about dental offices in Cyprus. The man at the center of it all was Caspian Morrow. Caspian wasn't on the company org chart. He wasn't in the lobby directory. His name didn't appear on the lease for the 14th floor or on any of the regulatory filings Audrey processed. He existed, as far as the official record was concerned, at a careful remove, a silent partner, a shadow investor, a name that appeared only in the handwritten notes she sometimes found tucked into courier envelopes from the Vancouver office, notes that were never addressed to her specifically, but that always ended up in the accounting intake pile, as though someone had decided she was trustworthy enough to receive them and smart enough not to ask about them. She'd seen him exactly twice before the night everything changed. The first time, he'd walked through the 14th floor at 7 in the evening when she was the only one left, and he had looked at her desk, not at her desk, and said good evening to the air 6 inches above her head and kept walking. He was tall. He wore a charcoal suit that fit the way expensive suits fit when they're made for a specific body by a person who does nothing else. He had dark hair going silver at the temples and the kind of face that had decided, somewhere around 40, to become more interesting instead of just older. He was accompanied by a man Audrey didn't recognize, broader and quieter, with a jaw like a brick wall and eyes that swept the room before Morrow had finished his second step inside it. The second time, she was leaving the parkade beneath the building, and his car, an understated black Mercedes, not flashy, not trying to impress anyone, had pulled in just as she was pulling out. He was in the passenger seat. He glanced over at her car, and for one suspended second, his gaze had actually landed on her face, and she'd felt something flicker in her chest that she immediately attributed to low blood sugar, and nothing else. That was in March. By October, Audrey had built a very thorough, very private mental file on Caspian Morrow. Not because she was investigating him. She was not suicidal. But because when you are an invisible woman in a room where dangerous things happen, building mental files is what keeps you alive. She knew that he held the majority interest in at least 4 shell companies that funneled money through Voss Meridian. She knew that his legitimate holdings, A hotel chain, a shipping brokerage, 2 construction firms were meticulous and largely clean, which told her that whoever did his books was excellent. She knew that a man named Gareth Lowe, Voss Meridian's VP of Operations, was skimming. Gareth had been skimming for approximately 4 months. Audrey had noticed it in month 2, identified the mechanism in month 3, and spent month 4 deciding what to do about it. It was elegant in a pedestrian sort of way. Inflated contractor invoices, the overages routed to a numbered account through a payroll subroutine that was designed to look like a rounding error. Someone had helped him set it up. Someone who understood the system well enough to hide inside it. She knew, with the particular cold certainty that comes from too many hours alone with spreadsheets, that the money Gareth was stealing wasn't Voss Meridian's money. It was Caspian Morrow's money, and she knew, with equal certainty, that Gareth Lowe had no idea what he had done. She had also noticed, in the last 3 weeks, that Gareth had started arriving at the office with a new energy. Lighter, more talkative. He'd replaced his watch. He'd taken 2 calls in the stairwell, with his back to the door, which was a habit that people only developed when they were either having an affair or discussing something they didn't want overheard. He had started staying late on Tuesdays, which was not his pattern, and leaving at lunch on Thursdays, which was also not his pattern. And then, on the 3rd Tuesday in October, Audrey stayed late to reconcile a set of quarterly reports, and Gareth Lowe had a meeting in the boardroom. She heard it before she saw it, voices through the glass partition, lower than office voices, the particular register of men speaking carefully. She didn't look up from her screen. Looking up was for people who didn't know how to be invisible. She tilted her chair half an inch to the left and adjusted the angle of her monitor until the reflection in the dark window behind it showed her the boardroom. There were 4 men. Gareth, nervous in the way that people are nervous when they've convinced themselves they're in control. 2 others she didn't recognize. Thick-necked, blank-faced, the kind of physical stillness that comes from practice rather than calm. And 1 man who stood slightly apart, near the whiteboard at the far end of the room, whom Audrey did recognize. His name was Declan Hurst. She knew it from a file she absolutely was not supposed to have seen, a file that had arrived in an unlabeled folder from Vancouver 8 months ago, and had sat in her intake pile for 4 hours before someone had come to collect it, agitated, with slightly too much eye contact. She had read 40% of it in those 4 hours. It was enough. Declan Hurst ran a competing distribution network, competing in the sense that both networks moved products the government had opinions about, and their territories had recently and violently overlapped in the port of Vancouver. Gareth was meeting with the enemy. Audrey put her eyes back on her screen and breathed very carefully through her nose. She understood, with sudden crystalline clarity, what she was looking at. Gareth wasn't just skimming. He was being paid, and in exchange, he was providing something, access, probably, information about routes, schedules, manifests, the kind of operational detail that, if passed to the right people at the right time, could make a large and carefully assembled shipment disappear, and make the man who had assembled it suddenly very vulnerable. The meeting lasted 22 minutes. When it ended and the 3 men had filtered out, Gareth stayed behind, straightening his tie in front of the dark window, with the satisfaction of a man who believed he had just made the best decision of his life. Audrey looked at her keyboard. Caspian Morrow had never done anything to her. He was not a good man. She held no illusions about that. The money she reconciled every month did not come from good places, and it went to places that were also not particularly good. She was not his employee out of loyalty or admiration. She was his bookkeeper's subcontractor because the pay was reliable and the work was honest in its own narrow way, and nobody asked her to do anything she couldn't sleep afterward. But she had watched him walk through this building and say, "Good evening" to the air above her head, and still say it, and she had watched the way the people around him held themselves differently when he entered a room, not with the performance of respect, but with the involuntary adjustment of people who have encountered something genuinely formidable and are recalibrating accordingly. And she had watched his numbers month after month, and they were the numbers of a man who was meticulous and controlled and had built something that functioned. And she had a creeping, uncomfortable feeling that what was about to happen to him had been organized by a man he trusted and had nothing to do with the quality of his judgment. She opened a new document on her screen. She typed for 90 seconds. Then she deleted it. She couldn't send an email. Any email she sent would be visible. Any call she made from this building would be logged. She couldn't leave the accounting system without flagging her activity. And she couldn't flag her activity without someone asking why. And anyone who asked why was someone she couldn't trust. She thought about Gareth Lowe adjusting his tie in the window. She opened her desk drawer and took out the small notebook she used for reconciliation notes. The physical one, because she was old-fashioned about the things that mattered. She tore out a page. She picked up a pen. She wrote very few words, because very few were needed. The VP skimming your accounts is feeding your Tuesday schedules to Declan Hurst. The meeting in your boardroom just ended. They've been paid to let the Thurston Street route go dark on Friday. She folded the paper twice and held it in her palm. Then she put on her coat, picked up her bag, walked to the elevator, and went down 11 floors to where she knew, because she had memorized things like this without intending to, the way some people memorize song lyrics, that Caspian Morrow's car was currently parked because the parkade access log had shown his key fob entry at 6:43, and it was now 8:29, and she had never seen him leave a building before 10 when he came in after 6. The parkade was cold and smelled of exhaust and damp concrete. Audrey walked to the black Mercedes. A man stepped out of the shadows to her left, not the brick-jaw man from before, a different one, younger, with sharp eyes and a very specific quality of stillness. "Building's closed," he said. Not threateningly, just factually. "I work upstairs," Audrey said. "I'm the subcontract bookkeeper for the 14th floor. I need to give something to Mr. Morrow." He looked at her. She knew what he was seeing, a round-faced, broad-shouldered woman in an unremarkable grey coat, clutching a shoulder bag and a folded piece of paper, visibly nervous, but not in the way that precedes violence. He was calculating threat, finding none. "What is it?" he asked. "Something he needs to read tonight," she said. "Before Friday." The man held out his hand. She shook her head. "Directly," she said. "Please." He studied her for another 3 seconds. Then he stepped back and spoke quietly to the shadow behind the car, and after a moment the rear door opened. Audrey walked to it. Caspian Morrow was sitting in the back seat with a laptop open and a phone pressed to his shoulder. He looked up at her with the particular expression of a man who does not expect interruptions and has not been interrupted in quite some time. His eyes were darker than she remembered. They landed on her face and didn't move. She held out the folded piece of paper. He took it. He set the phone down. He opened the paper and read it, and his face did not change at all, not in any perceptible way, except that the quality of his stillness shifted. The way a room changes when someone quietly closes a window you didn't know was open. He looked up at her. "You work upstairs," he said. His voice was low and even. "Subcontract bookkeeper," she confirmed. "I've been here 14 months. I've seen you," he said. She hadn't expected that. She kept her face neutral. "I'm aware you haven't," she said carefully. Something moved behind his eyes. "Audrey Sinclair," he said. "You processed the Q3 reconciliations for the Cyprus accounts." She felt her pulse stutter. "I processed what came across my desk, and apparently read more of it than your contract specified." "I have a very good memory for numbers," she said. "I can't help what they add up to." He looked at the paper again. Then he looked at her. "Thurston Street," he said quietly. "How certain are you?" The scheduling data was pulled from the operations server on Thursday afternoon, she said. I saw the access log in the system before it was cleared. Gareth Lowe's credentials. The meeting tonight ran 22 minutes. Declan Hurst was in the room. Caspian Morrow was very still. Go home, he said. Don't come in tomorrow. I have reports due. They'll keep, he said. He folded the paper and placed it inside his jacket, close to the chest. Go home, Miss Sinclair. Don't discuss this with anyone. I'll be in touch. She nodded. She walked back to the elevator. Her legs felt strange. Not weak, exactly, just unfamiliar, like she'd been using different muscles than usual. In the elevator, she pressed the button for her floor to retrieve her bag and stood in the polished metal doors, looking at her own reflection, round-cheeked and wide-eyed and thoroughly shaken, and said quietly to herself, well, that's done. She did not sleep particularly well. She made tea at 2 in the morning and sat at her kitchen table in Verdun with the lights low, listening to her radiator knock. She thought about what would happen if Caspian Morrow had already known. She thought about what would happen if he'd decided the easier solution was the simpler one. She thought about Gareth Lowe adjusting his tie. She did not go in on Wednesday. On Thursday morning, at 8:47, her buzzer sounded. The man who came upstairs was the brick-jaw one from the lobby, the first one she'd ever seen with Morrow. His name, he told her, was Sullivan. He said it the way people say a name that functions as a last name, even though it isn't. He sat in her kitchen, with the particular care of a large man in a small chair, and told her that Gareth Lowe had been dealt with. That Friday's route had been rerouted, that the people Declan Hurst had sent to manage the outcome had found nobody where they expected to find somebody, which was, Sullivan said carefully, a message in itself. And Mr. Morrow? She asked. Would like to meet with you, Sullivan said. This afternoon, if you're available. I'm available, she said before she could stop herself. The office was not in Montreal. Sullivan drove her 40 minutes south, over the bridge into the countryside at the edge of the island, to a property that sat back from the road behind iron gates and a long gravel drive and a stand of sugar maples that had gone fully crimson in the October cold. The house was stone, old Quebec stone, the kind that had been built to outlast the people who built it. Caspian Morrow was waiting in a study that smelled of wood smoke and old books. He was standing at the window with his hands in his trouser pockets, looking out at the maple trees. He turned when she came in and looked at her in the same way he had in the parkade. Attentive, calibrating, except that there was something different about it now, some quality of deliberateness, as though he had made a decision about how to look at her and was following through on it. Thank you for coming, he said. I didn't have a great deal on, Audrey said. The corner of his mouth moved. Sit down, he said. She sat. He sat across from her, which was not where she'd expected him. She'd expected the desk, the barrier, the performance of authority. He poured coffee from a carafe on the side table without asking and handed her a cup, and she was so disarmed by the basic courtesy of it that she forgot to be frightened for a moment. I had you looked into, he said. It was not an apology. I assumed 14 months, he said. You found the Cyprus routing discrepancy in month 2. Month 1, actually, she said. I just needed month 2 to be sure. He regarded her steadily. And to whom, she said. I didn't know who was watching what. I didn't know if the people above Gareth knew and had approved it. I didn't know if reporting it internally would make me the problem rather than him. She paused. I knew it was your money. I didn't know you. You know me now? I know your numbers, she said. Your numbers are honest. The scale is what it is, but the internal architecture is clean. Someone who runs clean numbers isn't running them for chaos. They're running them for control. She looked at her coffee. I decided you weren't sloppy enough to approve what Gareth was doing. Caspian Morrow was quiet for a moment. He's been with me for 6 years, he said. Not with grief, exactly. With something more measured than grief. the particular tone of a man who has learned to hold betrayal at an arm's length because it shows up too regularly to be surprising. His brother is in significant debt to Declan Hurst's people, Audrey said. I found it in the November invoices from last year, a contractor listing that looked like a vendor but mapped to a personal numbered account. He was paying Hurst's people back in installments. When the installments stopped, about 4 months ago, they gave him a different kind of offer. Morrow looked at her very carefully. You found all of this in the numbers. Numbers tell you everything, she said. People just don't look. You looked. I always look, she said. Nobody expects me to. He held her gaze for a long moment, and she felt it the way you feel the sun come out from behind a cloud in October, unexpectedly warm and slightly disorienting. I'm going to ask you something, Caspian Morrow said, leaning forward, elbows on knees, which made him seem somehow less like a man who controlled territory from a distance and more like a person in a room. And I want you to answer, honestly. I'll try. Why did you come to me? He said. You had nothing to gain. You had every reason to let it happen and walk away. The Thurston Street route goes dark, there's chaos. You collect your last check and find another contract. Nobody looks at the bookkeeper. Nobody ever looks at the bookkeeper. There was something almost rueful in the way he said it. You could have been invisible. Audrey thought about it honestly, which was the only way she knew how to think. Because invisible isn't the same as safe, she said. And because if Hurst's people got what they wanted on Friday, there would have been consequences that went past you. People further down the chain who weren't making decisions, who were just doing their jobs. Drivers, dock workers. She paused. I know what happens when operations like yours collapse in the wrong direction. I've processed the insurance claims. He was watching her with an expression she hadn't seen on him before. And, she added, with more honesty than was probably wise, you say good evening, even to empty rooms. I've been in this building for 14 months, and you're the only principal who's ever addressed me as though I was there. Caspian Morrow looked at her for a very long moment. I need a new head of internal accounting, he said. Not subcontract. Direct. Someone with security clearance. My security clearance. Which is different from the kind you file for with the government, and full access to the operational structure, not just the surface accounts. He paused. I need someone I trust. You don't know me, Audrey said. I know your numbers, he said. And there was something in his voice when he said it that made her throat tighten unexpectedly, because it was an exact reversal of what she'd said to him, and she understood that it was intentional. Your numbers are honest. The scale is what it is, but the internal architecture is clean. She sat with that for a moment. The salary would need to reflect the scope, she said. Name a number. She named one that was frankly aggressive. He nodded without flinching. There's an office on the 6th floor, he said. It's had a lock for 3 years that only one other person has a key to. That person is Sullivan, and Sullivan reports to me. Audrey looked down at her coffee cup, which was very good coffee, the kind that came from a place that didn't have a menu in the window, and thought about her apartment in Verdun, with the knocking radiator and the spreadsheets open on 3 monitors and the very quiet life she had built around the skill of being overlooked. She thought about what it would mean to stop being overlooked. I'll need 2 weeks to close out my existing contracts properly, she said. I don't leave things halfway. I would expect nothing else, he said. She looked up at him. I have conditions. Tell me. I don't carry anything, she said. No materials, no products, no messages that aren't numbers. I do the books. I give you the analysis. What you do with it is your responsibility, not mine. Agreed. And I don't pretend I don't know what I know, she said. If I see something, I tell you, even if it's inconvenient, even if it's someone you trust. He met her eyes. Especially then, he said quietly. She stood up and held out her hand. He stood and shook it, and his hand was warm, and his grip was the grip of someone who understood that a handshake was a contract. not a courtesy. "When does the sixth-floor office get a second key?" she asked. "Monday," he said. She nodded once and picked up her coat. Over the next 4 months, the internal architecture of Caspian Morrow's operation was quietly and comprehensively rebuilt. Not dramatically, not with upheaval and announcements, but the way that solid things are rebuilt. From the foundation, one honest beam at a time. Audrey moved into the sixth-floor office on the Monday she'd been promised and found it already equipped. 3 monitors, a system with access levels she hadn't known existed, a standing desk at exactly the right height, and a cup of coffee on the corner of the desk that was still warm. She didn't ask who had arranged that. She sat down and started working. What she found in those first weeks was both better and worse than she'd expected. Better, because the core of the operation was genuinely functional. Morrow had built something that worked, that had internal logic, that could, with careful handling, be run without constant crisis. Worse, because Gareth Lowe had not been acting alone. There were 3 other points of leakage, smaller and older, and at least one of them had been running so long it had effectively been institutionalized, written into the system as though it had always been there, invisible in the same way she had always been invisible, overlooked because nobody expected to find it. She found them all. She documented them with the careful, joyless precision of a surgeon removing something malignant. She presented the findings to Morrow on a Thursday evening in November, sitting across from him at the long table in the 6th-floor boardroom, her reports laid out in order, 1 stack for each point of compromise. He didn't interrupt while she talked. He read what she showed him. He asked 2 questions, both of them good questions, both of which she had already answered in the appendix. When she was finished, he sat back in his chair and looked at the ceiling for a moment. "How long has the 3rd one been running?" he asked. "Since before you consolidated the Vancouver operation," she said. "Approximately 9 years." He closed his eyes briefly. "I'm sorry," she said, because she was. "Don't be," he said. "I'd rather know." He looked at her. "You keep saying sorry for telling me things I need to hear." "Stop, it's a reflex," she said. "I'm working on it." "Work faster," he said, but there was no edge in it. There was, she thought, something almost fond. December was when things shifted. She noticed it the way she noticed most things. Not in a single moment, but in an accumulation of small data points. The way he'd started scheduling her into briefings that were above her formal scope. The way Sullivan had begun, without being told to, routing certain calls to her first. The way Morrow would sometimes end a meeting and then find a reason to continue the conversation in the corridor, which led to them walking to the parking level together, which led, on 3 separate Thursdays, to him driving her home himself, rather than having Sullivan do it, which was a deviation from pattern that she catalogued and did not mention. She was not a fool. She was, however, a woman who had spent the better part of her adult life making herself small to avoid consequences. And the sensation of not having to was so unfamiliar, it took her time to trust it. She trusted it the night he called her at 11 on a Wednesday in January. Not because of the hour, but because of what he said, which was, "There's a problem with the Laval accounts, and I think I know what it is, but I'd rather be wrong, and I want another set of eyes." He said this in the flat, stripped tone of someone who is genuinely uncertain, and Caspian Morrow was a man who was almost never uncertain in front of other people. She went in. She looked at the accounts. She found the problem, a routing error, not sabotage, a genuine systems mistake made during the December migration, and showed him, and watched the tension go out of his shoulders in a way that she had only seen happen around her. "You should sleep," she said at 1 in the morning, putting her coat on. "Probably," he said. He was standing by the window again. He stood at windows the way other people paced. She'd noticed, as though the act of looking outward organized his thinking. He turned. "You didn't have to come in. You needed the accounts looked at," she said. "I could have sent Sullivan." Sullivan doesn't understand the migration architecture, she said. And anyway, you called me. I did, he said. And he said it in a voice that was slightly different from his operational voice, a half-step quieter, less managed. She stood by the door with her coat half on. Audrey, he said. She waited. I'm going to say something, he said. And I want you to know that it is not a condition of your employment, and it does not require a particular response, and you are completely free to say nothing or tell me to mind my own business, which you would be entirely right to do. All right, she said carefully. He crossed the room. He stopped at a distance that was respectful and far too close at the same time. He looked at her in the way he had increasingly looked at her, with the full, undivided attention of someone who had decided that looking was not something to be done halfway. You told me that I said good evening to an empty room, he said. That it was the reason you came to find me in the parkade. It was one of the reasons, she said. The room wasn't empty, he said quietly. I knew where you sat. I've known where you sat since month 3. I said good evening because there was someone there to say it to. He paused. I've just been waiting for you to believe that. Audrey looked at him. She was a woman who believed in data. She believed in what the numbers showed, in the evidence of pattern over time, in the difference between a statistical anomaly and a structural truth, and the structural truth in front of her, assembled from 14 months of data points. The coffee already warm on the desk, the office at the right height, the Thursday drives, the 11 o'clock call, was not ambiguous. She let her coat drop back off one shoulder and said, very quietly, You're extremely frustrating to work for, you know. Something broke open in his expression. I've heard that, he said. He kissed her in the way that serious people do things, with full commitment and no apparent interest in doing it halfway, and she held on to the front of his jacket with both hands. And outside the January snow came down on Montreal in thick, indifferent sheets, and the city continued its complicated business, and neither of them was particularly interested in it just then. The February Gala was an annual event in the Montreal business world, nominally a charity benefit for hospital infrastructure, functionally an occasion for the city's legal and extra-legal economies to share a room and pretend to be the same thing. The venue was the Ritz-Carlton. The dress code was black tie. The invitation list ran to 400 and included senators, developers, 2 sitting judges, and enough organized crime money to capitalize a small bank. Audrey had attended the previous year as the +1 of a colleague from an earlier contract. She had worn a dark dress she owned, stood in corners, refreshed her drink twice, and left at 10. She had not been introduced to anyone. She had not been looked at. She had been effectively part of the wallpaper. She stood in front of the mirror, in the dressing room on the property in the countryside. She had been spending weekends there, a fact she had not made a policy decision about so much as allowed to become true, and regarded the woman looking back at her. The dress was green, not the emerald that seemed to proliferate in rooms like the one she was about to enter, but a deep, saturated teal, a color that caught light differently depending on the angle, that made her skin look warm, and her shoulders look exactly like what they were, broad and capable and her own. The cut had been made by a woman who worked out of a studio in the plateau, who understood bodies that didn't apologize for themselves, and the result was something that moved with her rather than against her. Audrey had worn her hair up, and there were small diamonds at her ears that she had not bought for herself. Sullivan knocked at the door. 2 minutes, he said. She picked up her bag and went downstairs. Caspian was waiting in the entrance hall in black tie. He looked the way powerful men look when they've stopped trying to perform power and are simply, quietly, the thing itself. He looked at her and didn't say anything for a moment. You look like someone they should worry about, he said. I thought that was the idea, she said. He offered his arm and she took it, and they went out into the February cold. The gala room stilled when they walked in, not all at once. Gradually, the way temperature changes, imperceptible until it was complete. Audrey felt the quality of attention shift around the room, felt people identifying and cataloguing, and assigning significance to the woman on Caspian Morrow's arm, and the woman was not who they expected. A man materialized at Caspian's left, silver-haired, senatorial, the practiced smile of someone who had been managing rooms like this for decades. He extended a hand. "Caspian," he said warmly, the warmth entirely calculated. "We didn't expect you to bring a guest this year." Caspian shook the hand with the mechanical efficiency of someone completing a necessary task. "Aldous," he said, "I'd like you to meet Audrey Sinclair." The man turned to her with the expression. She had seen it her whole life, of someone deciding whether to extend full attention or partial attention, based on a split-second assessment of relevance. She met his eyes and let him look. "Miss Sinclair," Aldous said, recalibrating slightly. There was something in her stillness that people found difficult to dismiss once they stopped expecting to. "I'm familiar with your name," Audrey said pleasantly. "The Infrastructure Fund, specifically the February disbursements for the last 3 fiscal years." Aldous's smile remained but changed in texture. "Audrey manages my accounts," Caspian said, with a precision that made the verb manage sound like something significantly more than it said. "Among other things," Audrey said. They moved into the room. People made space. Not the aggressive territorial space of people marking dominance, but the instinctive space of people who have looked at someone and concluded, without being told, that proximity has consequences. At the bar, an older woman in black silk touched Audrey's arm and leaned in. "Is that Morrow's new?" she began. "His," a man beside her said quietly, in a tone that settled the sentence without finishing it. Audrey heard it. She did not adjust her expression. She was, after all, very good at hearing things she wasn't supposed to hear. Later, at the edge of the terrace where the February cold was preferable to the room's specific social temperature, Caspian stood beside her and looked out at the city lights. "How many of them recognized you?" he asked. 11, she said. "From the accounts, directly or tangentially. And 7 are clean," she said. 2 are worried. 1 is very worried, and the way he was worried was interesting. He knows something is changing, but he doesn't know what. He was watching you the way people watch something they're trying to understand before it understands them. She paused. "And one of them has been moving money through a subsidiary of your property, holding in Laval without your knowledge. I identified it in December. I have the documentation." Caspian turned to look at her. "The same Laval account we looked at in January. Adjacent," she said. "I thought it was an error at the time. It isn't." He was quiet for a moment. "You came to a gala," he said, "and you worked." "I came to a gala," she said, "and I was at a gala. The work was incidental. I can't turn it off." He looked at her with an expression that she had categorized, after some private deliberation, as the one he reserved exclusively for her. A combination of awe and exasperation and something else. Something she had a word for, but did not say out loud in cold February air above a city that was watching them. "I know," he said. He put his hand over hers on the railing and left it there. "I don't want you to." Below them, the city moved through its January business, complicated and indifferent and continuous. Audrey Sinclair, who had spent 31 years making herself invisible, looked out at it and felt, for the first time, entirely present. Not seen in the way of being watched, but seen in the way of being known. The particular, irreversible phenomenon that occurs when someone has looked at the actual shape of you and decided that is precisely the shape they wanted to find. She turned her hand over on the railing and laced her fingers through his. Neither of them said anything else. There was nothing left to prove, and they were both, in their own ways, people who knew when the numbers had resolved themselves into something they could trust.